My dear people, this is Venkat. How are you all? I'd like to start the presentation with one question. How many of us have seen a long queue in front of a male toilet in an airport, train station, supermarket, mall, etc.? How many of us? Please raise your hands. Well, almost no one. Now, how many of us have seen a long queue in front of a female toilet in an airport, supermarket, train station, mall, etc.? Please raise your hands. Well, quite a lot of us. Yeah. My dear people, this is a proper engineering problem. It is the civil engineers, architects, and the authorities who design the toilet system, the number of cubicles, etc. And if 50% of the population have to wait longer in a queue just to relieve themselves, how is this a proper engineering design? And how is this design taking into consideration sustainable development? With this question, I start my presentation by thanking Maria Sa, my friend and colleague, for bringing the presentation to you all in Malta. Let's get started, shall we? I don't want to talk a lot about the literature, but very quickly, with the urgency of climate disaster, ecological emergency, and the reckless exploitation of natural resources, it becomes essential for engineering students to learn about sustainable development and its links with their chosen field of study. If you think of it, my dear people, engineering plays a major role in addressing several global issues. As engineering deals with extraction of resources, refining them, manufacturing, the supply chain to that of the recycling and disposal of products and processes. With the challenges facing humanity becoming more complex, it becomes essential that we educate the future engineers to be aware of all these issues and to make them responsible practitioners who could provide sustainable solutions. When we talk of sustainability, we just don't talk about the environmental sustainability, but also the other two pillars, the economic and the social pillars of sustainability. Now, the question is the current engineering curriculum suited to deliver the learners the essential skills for sustainable development? Are there rigorously tested methods in place for developing such a curriculum? These are quite important questions that needs to be dealt with very quickly. Looking at the literature, it did show that several integration mechanisms of sustainable development with the curriculum. These include just mentioning sustainable development to that of creating a new module on sustainable development. But then there was not a lot of extensive work that has been done on looking at embedding sustainable development systematically in the entire curriculum. This is something that requires looking at. The literature that I spoke about in the previous slide looked at all the countries, but when we focus on the developing countries, the research in this area is even more dire. Focusing on just one such developing country, let's just take India. As you can see from the graph above, there's been a huge increase in the number of higher education institutions in the country. Approximately 230% increase in the number of institutions in the last 20 to 30 years. So even though there's been a huge massification of higher education, there's been a lot of criticisms about the quality of the higher education that's being provided and also the quality of the graduating student in terms of being able to comprehend the subject effectively to be able to apply it in a professional setting. In this increase that you can see, most of the newly founded institutions are privately owned, non profit in theory, uh, in institutions. Especially, there's been a huge increase in the number of engineering institutions in the country. But one of the major criticisms on the engineering education is its clear lack of focus on sustainability and social aspects. Let me put this in context for you. In a few years, India would become the most populous nation, overtaking China, which brings about issues in terms of being able to provide the basic necessities such as food, water, housing, and infrastructure that is required, the medical facilities that are required for the population. Now, the question is the engineering curriculum suited to create graduates who can address these questions? And that is what this research looks at, as it tries to understand the awareness and attitude of engineering staff and students towards embedding sustainable development in the curriculum. We used a mixed method to collect data. Qualitative data was collected by interviewing engineering academics in South India, and quantitative data was collected from third year civil engineering students. So we formulated an experiment with control group and experimental group. The control group had regular lectures, whereas the experimental group had a modified lecture which looked at the subject matter that they were learning and how they are linked with sustainable development goals. Three such lectures were conducted, after which the students were given a controlled class test on the subject matter, and they were given a questionnaire based on sustainability. The quantitative data was analyzed using t-test, factor analysis, and standardized regression scores, whereas the interviews were analyzed with content analysis. These are a couple of examples of how we linked engineering curriculum with sustainable development goals, and these are a couple of slides from each of those lectures. If anyone is interested to know about these lectures, please do let us know, and we'll be very happy to discuss with you on this. There are two sets of results that we are going to be discussing. Initially, we'll look at the quantitative results and then the qualitative. In terms of the controlled class test, there was a stark difference between the experimental group and the control group in terms of their ability to comprehend the engineering subject that was being taught. With the experimental group, which had the applications of what they are learning on sustainable development, almost scoring more than 20% higher grades than that of the control group. If you think this is interesting, let's look at the next result. We wanted to assess the impact of embedding sustainable development in engineering curriculum on the students. So, along with the controlled class test, we also gave a questionnaire on sustainability. And as the results show, the experimental group scored higher in all the three areas in terms of their understanding of the significance of engineering towards sustainable development, their feeling of responsibility towards sustainable development, and also their awareness of sustainable development. Looking at the results, we can see that the experimental group scored higher than the control group in all the three key areas. Number one, in terms of the significance they felt engineering had towards sustainable development. Number two, in terms of the responsibility they felt as future engineering graduates towards having an inclusive and sustainable society. And third, or their overall awareness of sustainable development on the whole. This was quite interesting. We conducted factor analysis and created standardized regression scores for both the control and experimental group. And when we plotted it, the results couldn't be more obvious. With the experimental group scoring highly in terms of their attitude towards sustainability, the efforts they wanted to make towards sustainability, and in particular, the expectations that they had from their teachers in terms of delivering subject matter with elements of sustainability embedded in them. Also, interestingly, the students commented that, well, it's not just about scoring marks now, is it? It's about understanding the impact that you can have as an engineer towards the betterment of the society. This was quite encouraging. What say you? So far, we have looked at the responses from the students. Now, looking at what the staff said during the interviews, you would be very surprised. It was evident that there's a huge misunderstanding of sustainable development overall with the staff members. Most of them thought it was just the environmental pillar or were not aware of the social and the economic pillar of sustainable development. Some of the quotations from the interviews I have just given it to you all, and I've just spread it all around as a canopy. The engineering academics were not very convinced that sustainable development is something that should be pursued in engineering. Either the academics were not aware of it, or they were convinced that most of the 17 goals are to do with social research and they are not technical enough to be called as an engineering field. They also commented that having this is more of a soft skill for the students. They question me, where are the formulas, Venkat? Where are the computer aided design drawings? Where are the simulations? Where are the modeling? That is engineering. Whereas it was also seen that some of the academics were trying to reluctantly get on board as they know that having sustainable development is important for getting a funding, and also that this is an important emerging topic. And some of them did mention that they have started to mention these in their lectures. I just want to finish this slide with a comment from one of the academics who I interviewed who said, Venkat, this is not engineering. And thus the title of this paper and presentation. My dear people, critically looking at this, on the positive side, this particular research and some of the workshops that we have conducted in this area has created an increasing awareness of sustainable development goals and education for sustainable development in engineering curriculum among staff and students, and also in India as a developing country, as we have been seeing, there seems to be more interest in engineering academics to start looking into this particular area further. It was also evident that they are becoming more aware of the important role of engineering in sustainable development. And the students and the future engineering graduates to bring about sustainable development overall. To quite a few of them, it has given a new dimension of thought in terms of their subject. However, the learners and academics in the institutions, even though they are becoming aware of the colorful picture of the 17 SDGs, they did not know about the interconnections between them, the various subsections in each of these goals. Now, having an awareness is the first step, but is that enough? What can we do to accelerate it to the next level in higher education, especially now that we have less than 9 years or so for 2030? And finally, How successful is this particular method? Of course, there are quite a few limitations in this particular research in terms of the target population and the generalizability, etc., which is another aspect that we can take into consideration for any further research in this area. Some of the challenges that we were able to identify include, first and foremost, having an awareness of sustainable development and having an understanding of how to bridge the existing engineering curriculum with that of the sustainable development goals. This is an area that requires immediate addressing. This can be brought about by training the academics and also through individual and institutional initiatives, and for the institution at various levels to create opportunities to embed sustainable development goals. Overall, it boils down to having an understanding of the importance of sustainable development in engineering and the impact of engineering on sustainable development, and overall in creating graduates who can deal with the problems of the 21st century. My dear people, given the above results and reflections, it is an interesting question to ask how to measure the success of an SDG embedding exercise in a higher education curriculum, and by extension, even in the school education system. How to form a methodology or a model to embed and measure the effectiveness of embedding sustainable development in the curriculum that is adaptable to various socio-economic and cultural systems, especially with the higher education institutions in developing and underdeveloped countries being less involved and motivated towards sustainable development. How can we overcome this particular barrier? Even more pressing is to know that the developing countries, being the powerhouse of higher education of our planet, it becomes important for us to work in this particular area. And my dear people, with this thought, I'd like to conclude. I'd like to thank all of you for this presentation and especially to Maria Sa. Uh, Please contact us if you have any questions, and we'd be very happy to answer. And also, please feel free to scan the QR code so that you can message us instantly. Thanks a lot once again, and Maria Sa, the floor is all yours to finish. Bravo, my dear people. Bye.